What this trade war is going to do is something a little bit different that is confused with inflation. The prices of some things are going to go up. Yes, of course, some things, but the general price level won't go up. What's going to happen is we're going to see a significant drop in the standard of living. That's what these people are doing. I have been a fan of Trump simply because he's not a Jacobin Democrat, but he's an economic ignoramus. And putting on these tariffs is just asking for huge, huge trouble. We can break down what he said in particular in his speech. He said, well, you're shipping in fentanyl to the U.S. If the Donald wanted to end the illegal import of fentanyl into the U.S., he needs to legalize drugs. That would take the profit out of illegal imports of all drugs, frankly. And that would end the problem with the cartels, which is one of the things that he holds against the Mexicans. And as far as the trade deficits are concerned, if the Donald wants to get rid of U.S. trade deficits, what needs to happen is U.S. taxes and regulations need to be eliminated. That would reduce the cost of production in the U.S., and people would come to the U.S. instead of running away from the U.S. because of the huge amount of regulations and taxes that we have here. So the problem starts in the U.S. It's not caused by Canada or Mexico or China in all cases. What does the U.S. get from Canada other than maple syrup, the cost of which is going to go up considerably? It gets a lot of lumber and it gets a lot of oil. Of course, the U.S. has plenty of lumber and oil itself, but it makes more sense to import it from Canada for the same reason. Look, on these tariffs, maybe the Donald will say, we have a trade deficit with Guatemala. We import a lot more bananas than we export things to them. And maybe the Guatemalans are going to say, we don't have a car industry. We should be making Cadillacs here instead of importing them from the U.S. So what are these idiots going to do? They're each going to put on tariffs, and the Americans won't get bananas and the Guatemalans won't get cars because they cost a lot more. In other words, tariffs destroy the standard of living of the people in the country. In effect, the Donald is punishing Americans because he's got this idea in his head that the Canadians shouldn't be shipping these things. It's absolutely insane. Typically, the way it works is that tariffs are assessed when the boat hits the dock by the importer. So that an American importer is basically paying the tariffs. And generally what it means is the Chinese or Canadian company going to drop prices so that they don't lose volumes? Maybe, maybe not. Probably they'll just ship their goods elsewhere. But the Americans pay the tariffs, not the foreigners. And what happens is, with these political people, is that just as Trump has attempted to punish Canada, Trudeau, beating on his chest like a big monkey, thinks that he can now punish Americans. And what's Trump likely to do? Say, well, you punish me, I'll punish you more. And there won't be any trade between America and Canada if these two idiots keep it up, or any other country. Look, tariffs are just a form of taxation. And the name of the game should be denying revenue to the state, whether it's the Canadian state or the Chinese state or the American state, because it goes from the consumer's pocket into the pockets of the government, and then the government fritters it away on what it wants, not what the consumers want. The fact is that relative to the U.S., Canada is something of a sinking ship. A couple of generations ago, the Canadian dollar was actually worth more than the U.S. dollar. And the Canadian standard of living was comparable to that of the U.S. But now, the Canadian standard of living is only about 2/3 of the U.S. rated by GDP per capita. Actually, it's the same thing with Europe. Europe used to be on a par with the U.S., and it's fallen behind too. And why would this be? Okay, are Canadians or Europeans less intelligent than Americans are? No. They're much higher taxed and they're much higher regulated than Americans are. Not to say that America's a haven. Things are not great in America. This is why, frankly, I'm a fan of the Orient. Actually, China, especially the special economic zones in China, which, to my knowledge anyway, are actually the freest places in the world, tax-wise, regulation-wise, and they're expanding tremendously. So the West is really shooting itself in the foot by doing these things. It's not just between Canada and America, it's all of the West. It's no secret that we've had a huge bubble in the tech sector for years. And there's an old saying in the market, high tech, big wreck, because technology has been advancing at the rate of Moore's Law, actually since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution 2 centuries ago. And now the curve has gone hyperbolic. so that any company that looks like it's going to dominate will be overwhelmed by another breakthrough by another company from out of nowhere. Nobody heard of NVIDIA 10 years ago, but it became the largest company in the world. But the guy that is responsible for the development of DeepSeek, which has upset the artificial intelligence world, he didn't go to an American university. He's purely a product of Chinese culture, Chinese university, and he's done this all by himself. And somebody's going to upset DeepSeek, and it'll get even better in the future. This is a wonderful thing. This improves the standard of living of the world when these things happen. But it does upset people that are invested in dinosaur industries. Not saying NVIDIA is a dinosaur, but it's fallen behind. Trump recently threatened the Colombians with taxes. The Colombians export nothing to the U.S. but flowers and coffee. So he would have punished American coffee drinkers and flower buyers. Why was he doing this? Because he didn't want to see Colombia used as a way station for people coming to the U.S. Is that Colombia's problem, that people jump off from Colombia to the U.S.? No. The problem is with the U.S. that, A, it doesn't defend its own borders, and worse than that, there are so many benefits for people that come to the U.S. They get free medical, they get free food, they get free hotel rooms. Of course, any poor person in the world would want to come to the U.S. and live off the fat of the land. It's not a reason to punish Colombia. And once again, as I said before, tariffs don't increase inflation. What increases inflation, the general price level, is an increase in the money supply. What tariffs do is they increase the prices of individual items, not the general price level, but individual items. And people can buy less of those items, and they can use their money to buy something else. Forget about this whole national security thing anyway. Trade is between individuals and companies. It's like Trump is planning on denying Canadians oranges and fresh fruits, which come from Florida and California. You can get them from Brazil too, but it's more costly to ship them all the way from Brazil. So what does that mean, incidentally, national security? It's a chimera. Is Trump defending the U.S. from some kind of a threat from Canada or from Mexico, or for that matter, even from China, which of course is a growing military power? But frankly, it's always been said, when goods stop crossing borders, soldiers start crossing borders. It's a bad idea. It creates antagonism, not only between the government officials and the governments, but between the people of the individual countries who are told by their governments to blame those terrible foreigners. It's their fault that you don't have this, not our fault. Look what's happened with China. The U.S. cuts off various technological items, chips, machines that make them, whatever, to China. What happens? I mean, the Chinese aren't dumb and they're not poor, so they create their own industry and obviate the need to buy anything from the U.S. So it's the U.S. shooting itself in the foot. It seems smart in the short run. It's really stupid in the long run. In addition, when you put on tariffs, that creates a class of smugglers. When you have a lot of people that are smuggling, you got a lot of people that are evading the law and getting in trouble with the law, and maybe you create a cartel to smuggle. I'm afraid that Trump is living in the past. There was a time when America ruled the world, but at this point, a lot of America does is consume by shipping out dollars to foreign countries who give us real goods in return. So we have a time bomb of, nobody knows actually, but it's $20, $30 trillion that are outside the U.S. That at some point that we've sent foreigners who have accepted these dollars, and they've shipped us really good things that have increased the standard of living in the U.S. But at some point, because of all these things that Trump is doing, maybe people won't want to accept dollars anymore. They see that it's dangerous accepting dollars. The Russians found how dangerous it was dealing with dollars. If the U.S. decides it doesn't want you, it embargoes you and maybe steals all your funds that are in dollars. So nobody wants to use dollars anymore. That's what the BRICS are all about. Every currency in the world is a fiat currency. They're all backed by nothing. And from day to day, who knows why traders buy or sell a currency? There can be many, many factors. But the long-term trend of the dollar is down. Why do I say that? Because the U.S. government is running at least a $2 trillion per year deficit. And it finances that deficit by selling bonds and bills to the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve pays for it by printing up Federal Reserve notes that it credits the U.S. government for in commercial banks. and that increases the money supply. So I'm afraid that inflation is not going away, and it's wonderful what Elon Musk is trying to do by cutting government waste. Look, I don't want to see the government become more efficient. If it becomes more efficient, it becomes more dangerous in pursuing you for what they think they owe you in taxes. They may become more efficient in stopping smugglers that are bringing things that Americans want into the country, but politicians don't want brought into the country. What I'm very happy about Musk doing is cutting waste, where trillions of US dollars that the government spends are basically given to political cronies and NGOs and all kinds of people that do nothing for that money. Wealth that's basically stolen from the American populace. We might have a real crisis building up. It depends on whether Trump and other politicians abroad decide to play a really serious game of chicken, or whether they back off before they crash their cars into each other. So how can we profit from this as individuals, I guess, is the question. And it's tough when companies across the board are being hurt. Workers across the board are being hurt. Incomes are going to drop. Standard of living is dropping. People won't be able to service their huge debts as this compounds. It's really tough to profit in a deflationary environment, which this may cause, where people can't pay their debts because income goes down so much. I guess the best thing that you can do is make sure that you keep what you have. And I've been buying gold for many years. Gold is reasonably priced right now, in my opinion, relative to everything else, relative to cars, houses, food. It's not a speculative bargain anymore. But you should buy it because it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And with the kind of financial and economic catastrophe, which we could be on the edge of, you want a financial asset that's not somebody else's liability. Second thing I'm doing is, in the markets right now, the most underpriced sector have been small resource companies, the ones that mine and drill for oil and gas and copper and gold and nickel and what have you. They're historically extraordinarily cheap. Everybody hates them for lots of reasons we could talk about. So that's where I'm going right now. I'm certainly not going into tech stocks, which are in a deflating bubble. I think it's a deflating bubble at this point.